modern life can be very stressful, and people have implemented a wide variety of methods to try to alleviate the stresses of life. One such method is to escape, temporarily leaving behind the real world to enter a place where those stresses don't exist. Commonly called escapism, this method has pervaded our society. One only needs to look towards the glut of successful bombastic action films, romance novels, and TV thrillers to find evidence that many people enjoy the escape to the fantastic. Unsurprisingly, this trend is present in gaming. Glancing through the most popular titles of the year, we see games about nimble samurai, hulkish soldiers, valiant heroes, clumsy mailmen, and other common fantasies. Games are a medium that are fundamentally different than any other because of their interactivity. Instead of merely observing an escapist world, players can place themselves inside fantasy worlds in a way that allows them to shape it to their will. It's hard to say that when watching James Bond on the silver screen, the viewer becomes Agent 007. Viewers might desire to be as quick-witted or charismatic as Bond, but that isn't really the same as embodying his likeness. However, GoldenEye 007 for the N64 puts the player directly in Bond's shoes. Players are given a world where they can run, gun, sneak, or sabotage, just like Bond can. GoldenEye 007 promises to satisfy the player's desire to become a savvy secret agent, and it definitely isn't alone. Many games promise fantastical worlds where players can escape from their boring everyday lives to become explorers, warriors, romantics, or anything else they would want to be. These gaming escapes allow for more self-insertion than static media like TV or books. But are these escapes healthy? Some psychologists fear that escapist play can increase the likelihood of players developing addictive relationships with their games, to the point that, in the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, psychologists listed gaming disorder as a diagnosable mental illness, characterized by, quote, a pattern of excessive, prolonged internet gaming that results in a cluster of cognitive and behavioral symptoms, including progressive loss of control over gaming, tolerance, and withdrawal symptoms, analogous to symptoms of substance use disorders. As with substance-related disorders, individuals with internet gaming disorder continue to sit at a computer and engage in gaming activities despite neglect of other activities. There is definitely validity to the idea that games can cause players to neglect the real world in favor of a virtual experience. However, that is not the full story of gaming escapism. While escapist play can have negative effects on some players, in moderation, escapist play will have more positive impacts on players. When analyzing the nature of escapist play, it is important to understand the nature of game fantasy. In their book, The Rules of Play, Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman highlight the artificiality of games as one of their defining features, claiming that games exist in a world separate from our normal reality. The authors build on the idea that games are artificial with their concept of the magic circle, which is the idea that when playing a game, participants enter into a sacred space that operates under rules not present in reality. This magic circle differentiates games from other mediums by allowing players to leave the normal rules of reality behind temporarily. If someone punched a stranger in the face, that person would be charged with assault. But when a boxer punches their opponent, this behavior is expected and encouraged. Game designers create rules and contextualize them in a way that produces their desired fantasy. While the magic circle facilitates the creation of fantasy in games, it fundamentally requires interaction. In the words of Salen and Zimmerman, the magic circle can define a powerful space, investing its authority in the actions of players and creating new and complex meanings that are only possible in the space of play. But it is also remarkably fragile as well, requiring constant maintenance to keep it intact. This interactive quality of the magic circle facilitates the creation of an active escape. In Brave New World of Warcraft, a conceptual framework for active escapism, researchers developed the concept of active and passive escapism. According to the authors, projective escapism simply requires engrossment, and it allows for the projection of the self onto the characters in the fantasy, and it can be found in both passive and active escapes. By its very nature, passive escapism doesn't require interactivity. Television, books, and movies are all passive escapist mediums. On the other hand, active escapism requires the escapee to actively participate in the fantasy, giving it a greater sense of presence than passive escapism. The researchers draw a distinction between these two kinds of escapism, finding that passive escapism simply distracts the escapee from their problems, while active escapism is more of a proactive and direct response to stressors. As the researchers state, in direct response to identity stressors, active escapism allows individuals to inhabit a version of their ideal selves instantly via their in-game avatars. As with perceived control, individuals that face identity stressors tailor their experience to specifically address their feelings of helplessness and insecurity. Many people experience stress as a perceived lack of control in their daily lives, while others feel anxious about their identity when they notice that their actual selves do not live up to their ideal selves. Active escapism can more effectively help people respond to threats attacking their control and identity, which is a distinct advantage escapist play has over other passive escapes. Escapist tendencies also tend to be present in creative individuals, suggesting a link between escapism and creativity. In his book, This Virtual Life, Escapism and Simulation in Our Media World, psychologist Andrew Evans highlights that the escapist has so many features of the creative personality that they may even largely overlap. Evans goes on to suggest that creativity is characterized by intelligence, sensitivity, imagination, competitiveness, critical detachment, experimentation, nonconformity, and self-sufficiency, and many of these characteristics are shared by escapism. This is further supported by a paper from Peta Gershom, which found that escapism gave escapees a sense of relief when pursuing creative endeavors, and that they were, quote, empowered by their escape into an unreality as they created their digital stories. Creativity describes the ability to see beyond what already exists, so perhaps it is unsurprising that flirtations with the unreal world strengthen the escapee's ability to think creatively. As great as the benefits of escapism are, they might not be worth it if the escapee becomes addicted to the game. Escapism is at its most dangerous when the fantasy is no longer a temporary escape, but a permanent residence. Yi-Fu Tuan addresses this in his book Escapism, where he warns, quote, "Escapism, I will argue, is human and inescapable. There is nothing wrong with escape as such. What makes it suspect is the goal, which can be quite unreal. And what is wrong with the unreal, with wild fantasy? Nothing, I would say, so long as it remains a passing mood, a temporary escape, a brief mental experiment with possibility. However, fantasy that is shut off too long from external reality risks degenerating into a self-deluding hell, a hell which, nevertheless, can have an insidious appeal." Concerned researchers share Tuan's fear, and as a result, have conducted many studies about the relationship between escapism and addiction. In a paper from the Computers and Education Journal, researchers examined socialization, advancement, and escapism as three primary motivations for escapism, to determine if they were predictive of game addiction. The researchers found that escapism served as a strong push effect towards the virtual world, increasing the odds of developing an addiction, while advancement in the game served as a strong pull effect. As the researchers themselves summarize, in general, escaping from failure in life is a push force for gaming, while the pursuit of advancement in game is a pull force for gaming. The effects of push and pull acting together, and the effective mediation effects of multiple motives, thus arise between game involvement and problematic internet use. Their study does show a link between escapism and an increased likelihood of addiction, and they aren't the only ones. In a study of MMORPG players, researchers again found that escapism was a predictor of addictive behavior. The authors found that escapism was an important part in the development of addiction, because it encouraged players to maintain unhealthy behaviors. While these studies do show an undeniable correlation between escapism and addictive behavior, the vast majority of players will be able to maintain a healthy relationship with their games, as shown by a study published in the International Journal of Mental Health and Addiction, which found that only 1.4% of gamers suffer from addiction, and 7.3% of players suffer from problem gaming. Anything good in moderation can also be bad in excess, and escapist play is no exception. It should be noted that passionate and extensive play isn't necessarily proof that someone has an addiction. As psychologists Laura Stockdale and Sarah M. Coyne point out, it is important to note that time spent playing video games alone was not associated with negative social, emotional, and psychological outcomes, and that these negative outcomes are specifically related to video game addiction. Instead of playtime, psychologists primarily look at the mindset of the player and their relationship to games and the effect the hobby has over their lives. Psychologist Robert J. Vallerand proposed a dualistic model of passion which defines harmonious and obsessive passion, based on how one integrates their passion into their identity. This model is useful for determining if a passion is harmful or not. According to Vallerand, harmonious passion, quote, produces a motivational force to engage in the activity willingly and engenders a sense of volition and personal endorsement about pursuing the activity, while obsessive passion causes people to feel, quote, compelled to engage in it because of these internal contingencies that come to control them. His concept of obsessive passion is similar to the addictive behavior of an addict who suffers withdrawal when separated from their passion. Conversely, harmoniously passionate people are able to leave their passion at any time, suggesting a healthier relationship with their passion. The effects of obsessive and harmonious passion are further explored in a paper from Qichen Wang and Yi-Shui Chu that applied Vallerand's passion model to games, finding that players with harmonious passion played about as much as players with obsessive passion. However, obsessive passion positively correlated with the likelihood of developing an addictive relationship with games, while simultaneously finding that harmonious passion was not correlated with the likelihood of game addiction. Players with an obsessive passion for games will find that escapism will increase their likelihood that they will become addicted, and such players should not turn to escapist play for their coping mechanism. Harmonious players, on the other hand, are unlikely to develop an unhealthy addiction to their play, and will primarily experience the positives of gaming escapism. On a wider societal level, many people fear the concept of escaping to a fantasy world. Science fiction authors often write their stories with the intent of providing warning or prediction about the direction society is heading. The Veldt by Ray Bradbury is a short story about the Hadley children and their nursery, which lets the children live out any fantasy they wish. As the story progresses, the children refuse to leave their nursery, much to the dismay of their parents, who begin to feel that the parents value their fantasy more than reality. The Veldt was published in 1950, and at the time, the concept of a world so entirely convincing was science fiction. However, in 2019, the idea of virtual reality is not only possible, but is commercially available to the public in the form of virtual reality headsets. Salen and Zimmerman's Magic Circle is perhaps most potent in these virtual reality headsets, where the screen entirely replaces the real world. While many people, like Bradbury, fear that VR will distance us from reality, Evans suggests that our escapist fantasies can be used to widen our perception of reality. In his own words, dissociation could extend, in VR, to the experience of being someone else, potentially a healthy alternative to egotism. Ideally, the future of VR should help us experience the other. VR is a technology that is capable of allowing players to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, both literally and metaphorically. Normal games can create these empathetic escapist experiences as well, though VR can more persuasively convince the player that they are literally in the shoes of another. Escapism is a common strategy people use to deal with anxiety, stress, and the hardships of modern life. Its prevalence in gaming is unsurprising when you consider how the Magic Circle creates a space where rules not bound by reality can exist, allowing for the development of novel and interactive fantasies. Many of the positive effects of gaming escapism stem from the fact that games are an active escape, which can potentially give players feelings of control and identity. However, like many good things, escapism can be taken too far. In excess, escapist play can lead to the development of an addictive personality. However, if one understands how and why they play games, they can identify if they are at risk of developing an addictive relationship with games. At times, the stresses of modern life can be overbearing. Escapist play can be the much-needed oasis, offering respite from our lives of mundanity and anxiety. The services these games provide can be unquestionably healthy for society, as long as we don't allow our escapist play to become Tuan's self-deluding hell. Thanks for sticking around for the entire video. Going into it, I had heard a lot about the stereotypes around escapism, but I wanted to look into it further, and frankly, you could take this to a whole nother level. My essay was really more of a brief sampling of the many articles discussing the nature of escapism. However, I did want to take some time at the end of this video to promote a couple of things. Firstly, if you enjoy my stuff, consider checking out my Patreon. I don't really have many rewards for patrons, so this is really just a glorified tip bucket. But your support is greatly appreciated. Additionally, I also have a Discord, so if you are interested in joining that, a link will be in the description. Anyway, this has been Chariot Rider. Have a good day.